to it and get started. First thing to remember is that the midterm exam will run for 1 week. 1 week only, and it starts Wednesday and will run through May 11th. So that's the 3rd. It's the day after tomorrow. And the reason I'm kind of emphasizing this is because for the most part, I always start Thursday. I run Thursday to Thursday. But I started early this quarter because our midterm happens to be at the same time as the spring in-service session. So the testing lab, because the campus itself is closed on the 5th, you will not be able to take the test. But I still wanted to give you the full week to do it. So it is closed on May 5th, but it'll be open through May 11. Okay, it is, or you will take it, in the Instructional Testing Services. That's over in the Center Building, 311. It used to be called the Computer Lab. And that's essentially what you'll do. You'll go in there and take the test on the computer. And it is an objective exam. There will be 50 questions. There are no essay questions. There is no short answer. There's nothing like that. It is just simply, you know, what we used to call multiple choice. And the question comes up always like, okay, what is it that I need to know in a very specific sense without you giving me the answers? That is, what you need to know, the question is, do I need to know all these people that they talk about? Do I need to know all the dates? Because that often leads to panic. The answer is sort of yes. The answer is you do need to know the people, because it is the people involved that drive the history of film. It is the people who are creating all of these things, creating the film language, doing all of that stuff, and we need to go back and say, yes, this person is important. And in some cases, we even name it after the person's a certain thing that they have created or whatever. As for dates, okay, significant dates, but I will only ask the question involving things within that. And I'll give you an example here. All right, this is what it would look like with regard to dates. From the mid-1920s to the late 1960s, Hollywood produced more of this kind of film than any other. Okay, we're talking about dates. That spans a long time, but that's the dates that would involved. And so what kind of film was it? I think you could even say that right now. Even if you didn't even take my course, you'd probably look at that and go, oh yeah, Westerns. Because that was the genre for American cinema. Westerns, 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 and more Westerns. We even have those names for it, if you'll recall. We have A-list Westerns and also those crazy B Westerns and with the singing cowboys and that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of question that I would ask with regard to dates. Now, what about people, all right? Here's a good example. The only one to make a successful transition from silent film to sound film, though his style remained more visual than verbal. Okay, of all of those silent film people, only one really succeeded with sound. And I know you already know this. Harold Lloyd. Which would surprise a lot of people because everyone knows that Charlie Chaplin continued to make a lot of films at this time. But he was not that successful, not as successful as Harold Lloyd was. Chaplin, what I like about Chaplin here, just as an aside, is that Chaplin never trusted the sound movies, didn't trust talkies. And so his first films, you know, in the 1930s, up until about the time of The Great Dictator, they were silent movies. They were still silent movies with sound effects and music, because Chaplin wrote most of the music himself. And there is that wonderful, you should see it sometime, that wonderful movie called Modern Times, which is where he's working. It's kind of set in the future kind of a place. And he's working all day long, and it's a silent movie, except at one point he's tired of working, and he starts to slow down, and the big screen picture behind him, the boss says, "Get to work!" and that's the only thing you hear in the movie. So he knew what to do with sound. He just thought, I don't need a lot of people talking. Okay. So that's the kind of stuff. That's what we're talking about here. That's the important people that you need to know. So that's how that part works. Okay. And moving on, the good news is that you are all allowed one 3x5 note card in the testing center. It is just one, but you can go front and back if you want to. My advice is always to write down the stuff that confuses you. You know, part of what we're doing here for this exam is for you to stop and get your ideas sorted, right? That's what the exam is all about. All of this information is coming at you from these wonderful videos, and all of that information is now circulating all through your mind, and what the exam is trying to do is to get you to focus that and to say, okay, this is how this works, this is how this part comes together over here. All of this stuff comes together. A lot of this, it will come to you and you'll say, I know that. That's interesting. I liked what they were saying, and it stuck in my head, and I'm really excited about it, so I know that. Others of this kind of stuff can be a little confusing or whatever, and I'm not sure about it. That's why you have the note card, because then you can take down the factual information, write it on that note card so it works as a stimulus for you. When you're taking it and you might end up with that question, and it's like, oh, I can't remember how that works. It's on my note card. So that's what I advise about the note card. All right, moving on. Study guides are now available on Moodle. So if you haven't downloaded them or downloaded it, please do. Essentially what it is all of the stuff that we have looked at through this week, and it's for you to kind of look through it and go, oh yeah, I know that, oh yeah, I know that, whoops, I'm not sure what this one is, I better do a little research or whatever to get that straight, but all the rest of this stuff I know, blah, blah. That's kind of what that study guide is for. All right. House cleaning things. You are responsible for your exam, so again, you have to get into the testing lab. And let me emphasize again and again, as I do all throughout the term, is check their website. Go onto their website. They will tell you the hours of operation so that you can kind of more or less make an appointment, not with them, but an appointment with yourself to say, okay, they close at 9 o'clock, or they close at 7 o'clock, or they close at 5 o'clock, or whatever. I can get in there at 3 o'clock, and I know I'm going to have all the time in the world to get it done if they close at 7. There is no time limit on the exam. You just take as long as you need. Okay. There'll be no makeup examinations. That is, just because you didn't make it, don't call me and say, I didn't make it because I didn't feel like it. You're not going to take it. Okay. What is going to be on the exam? It's going to cover everything from our first week through this week, the romantic comedy. So it starts with the classic Hollywood style, and it works its way through this week, which is the romantic comedy. So specifically, let's start with this. What we know from the very beginning is this American movie industry is pretty much understood according to three things. It is production, distribution, and exhibition. Translated, that means that this Hollywood industry there, all of these studios, they make movies with their own production companies. They distribute the movies, okay, to their own theaters. Okay, so they kind of control all that three. That's the first part as in the overview of the American movie industry. The second part is they discovered something that minimizes financial risk, and that is genre. So it's the industry's use of genre to minimize financial risk. One good film of this type deserves another good film of this type. So when they realize that a lot of people, and they learn this from the written word as well. They learn it from dime novels or whatever, when there are certain what you'd call genre with regard to them, types of stories such as westerns, such as crime novels, those kinds of things. And people like these kinds of things, so the movie industry begins to make Westerns, and they're very successful. So if one is successful, another one will be successful. So that is one reason why the creation of the use of genre. Also, have a good idea of the technology in the early days. Understand what is meant by persistence of vision. That's the technical, scientific term, if you will, of this whole idea of the of moving pictures. That if you could take a series of individual frames of movement and project them through a machine that created this movement, you got, obviously, movement. And that's what it was all about. Roughly for silent movies, that was 16 to 18 frames per second created for us, normal movement. So if you had a camera with the old idea of grinding it this way and running at 16, 18 frames, somewhere in there, and you panned that along as a horse went galloping by, and you turn around and project that at the same speed, you would get a horse galloping along the field in normal speed. Okay, and when sound came along, that was standardized at 24 frames. The 24 frames per second was the only reason they settled on that is because at 24 frames per second, you got decent fidelity in sound reproduction. All right, also, the key innovations in individuals, have an understanding what the kinetoscope. These are all the early inventions that led to full-scale motion pictures. And Edison and Dixon are important people involved in the production of the technology of movies. Understand Nickelodeon era, that's the beginnings of movie theaters. And the Motion Picture Patents Company, which roughly lasted those 8 years or so of the 1908 to 1915, which had an absolute control of the movie business. And you get the movie palace, okay, from the Nickelodeon era into these humongous giant theaters that showed, the sole purpose was to show movies. Also, the classic narrative style was discussed. And this creates for us an aesthetic of motion pictures. It's the beginning of how we look at films and how we review films and how we glean meaning from film. The first thing they discussed was what is known as equilibrium and disruption. Okay, this is very much Hollywood's way of imitating the narrative of anything, such as a novel, a story. What you have here, according to our book here, this quotation from the book, is an initial state of affairs is introduced after which something occurs to disturb this equilibrium. So if you think about this in terms of most, and I'd say 99% of all movies, even those that are produced today, if you think back on that, it opens, in most cases, on something that you'd call normal. It is life goes on simply the way we all think it should go on, and then something occurs to disrupt that equilibrium, whatever that may be. In a typical kind of science fiction story of today, you have life as normal, people going about their business, and then something falls out of the sky, or in the case of Spielberg's War of the Worlds, something pops up out of the ocean, out of the ground, that disrupts that equilibrium. Okay. Subsequent events attempt to restore the original status quo, but this is repeatedly frustrated, and order is recovered only at the end of the film. So that creates for us the tension, that creates for us all the excitement that we like in films, in that people, usually, are there trying to restore things back to the way they were, but their efforts are usually thwarted. Something happens. It's take one step forward, take 2 steps back, or maybe 2 steps forward, another step back. back and forth until we reach the end when something occurs, the crisis moment, something occurs in which we are able to overcome the obstacles and things revert back to normalcy. Okay. Also involved here is what they called problem solving. Over the course of the narrative, characters struggle to achieve their goals or solve their problems. That's a given. It can be anything. It can be, in character studies, the emphasis is on a character who's got to solve a problem. And it may be any kind of a problem. It could be an outside problem. He's got to find a formula. As a scientist, he's got to find the formula that would change the course of nature or whatever. Or we've got to find a goal. We have to reach a level of this. In other words, as it says right there, we're solving problems. Okay, they overcome those who stand in their way. This is typical good guys versus bad guys. You've got your central character, which we would consider our hero. This is our protagonist. This is the guy that is moving from point A to point B. He's got a problem to overcome. And in order to overcome this problem, there are others that stand in the way, okay? Villains. Triumph, okay, they overcome those who stand in their way. They triumph over adverse circumstances. That could be anything. It could be adverse circumstances of their own making. And or they transcend their own limitations. Again, that last part is relative to good character studies, which they find out they have their own limitations, find out that the problem is really me, and I've got to overcome that. Okay, temporal and spatial limits, what are those? Well, as they sound, temporal dimension is a specific deadline has to be met, or a certain task has to be completed by a definite time. Okay, that can be very simple, and in newspaper stories, they've got to get this done and get it out into the public by the deadline or whatever. Or it could be in a film like DOA, a film made in the late 1940s, one of the film noir movies about a guy who's been poisoned and he's going to die. But before he dies, he wants to capture his poisoner. But he has a deadline. He's got to find this guy before he literally dies. Okay? Or you've got a task that has to be completed. You've got to do this before time runs out. So that's understandable with regard to temporal. Spatial, what else can we say about that except it's space? Characters moving toward precise destination or geographical goals. This would be a typical Western in which it involves the wagon train that leaves from Missouri out on its way to Oregon. It's that kind of thing. Okay. Journey. This becomes a symbolic thing when we talk about journey with regard to the movies. The narrative. In the narrative, the characters move not only spatially, but they realize other non-spatial goals as well, such as what we just talked about, making deadlines, solving mysteries, falling in love, discovering new worlds, and coming to terms with themselves and or their fellow travelers. One of the perfect example of all of this stuff, an absolutely perfect example, is John Ford's Stagecoach. In that particular film, they are on a journey, a literal journey. They're on their way to Lordsburg. Okay, within that stagecoach are diverse characters, each with different personalities, and each one trying to deal with each other and their personalities. On the outside of that are the Indians that are attacking that stagecoach, and they're trying to get away from that. And then as they reach their goal, the main character's got to have a gunfight with a guy. So there's all kinds of stuff like that that you can find. If you want to talk about a perfect example of the journey, you'll find it in Stagecoach. You also have the audience's journey. Going to the movies. I like this, the way they approach this, because back in the golden age of Hollywood, back in the golden age of going to the movies, literally that's what you did. You went to the movies, and you went to the movies, and a movie theater was a magical place. You got all of this stuff. Amazing things would appear on those screens, and most people, 99% of the people, didn't know how that worked, didn't understand movie making. To them, it was magic. It was a dream world. It was just going into this huge auditorium, the lights would dim, and it was like going to sleep, and there was a dream for you, because dream images would show up. So what we see on the screen is what we are doing at that very moment, which is a journey. But we are also there looking for goals, participating in deadlines, and undertaking journeys. We are pretty much participating in what is going on. I don't think we get that same effect today. Today, the movies come to you. You don't go to them. You know, the movies come through Netflix. They go through whatever you can, you know, you just pop the button on your remote control and you get a movie. It's not quite the same. And I went to one of these, and I've got an editorialize here. I went to this, friend and I went to see this movie. It was an older movie at one of the local theaters. And it was, the name of the movie is Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes from 1968, which is a good movie. It's a very well-made movie. And I wanted to see it again in a movie theater, big, wide screen. No. I had to put up with a 30-minute TV show that came before it. They just couldn't show me the movie. They had to give me this give and take, this interview with one of the gorillas. And it was just a scene from some crazy TV show. And I was losing control, but I haven't gone back since. But it irritated me, because all I wanted to do was go see the movie Planet of the Apes. I really didn't care about this give and take between the gorilla and this stupid, asinine idiot who was questioning him. But there it was, just like watching a big TV show. And I think a lot of the people now have this in their mind, that that's what the movie theater is, just going to be, a big, big TV show. Enough of the editorial, we move on. Okay, I don't know why I said that. It just made me mad. It went through my head. And okay, segmentation. A process of structural analysis that breaks the film down into its basic narrative units. Okay, this is how film works. If you are in film production, if you are in the side here of media arts where you are producing films, you already have a good idea how that works. Films are segments. They are broken down into segments. Those segments unite to form what you might call a gestalt, you know, something. The sum of its parts, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's how movies work. But to make that film, you break it down into individual components, and that's what they mean by here. The dramatic unities, according to Aristotle, which go all the way back to antiquity, such as action, time, and space, these things, most films violate those unities and lend themselves to this segmentation again, lend themselves to itty bits of pieces of film that are put together to create for us a whole. Okay, moving on. Got to move on here. Okay, classic film style. You should have an idea of what these things are here. Mise en scène. That's easy to remember because it's a French word that means simply, you know, what you see on the screen. That's it. It's everything that you see within that frame. There's nothing outside of it. You don't even bother with anything. So what the director is showing you is what's important, and it's everything that's within that frame, okay? Camera, the movement techniques with camera, you know, okay. We can pan a camera on its axis, like, you know, back and forth like this. We swing it back and forth. Or the camera itself moves with somebody. That's a tracking shot, you know, all of those kinds of things. Lighting, the different types and effects. To understand three-point lighting, that's the basic, the rudimentary way of setting up scenes is with three-point. Understand sound, shot and scene. Know the difference, and it will be on the exam, I guarantee you this. Know the difference between shot and scene. A shot and a scene are not the same thing. A shot is turn the camera on, turn the camera off. That's the shot. A scene is the narrative moment. It is the single part of the narrative. Okay, they're two different things. You can just turn the camera on and turn the camera off, but a scene has a certain narrative value to go with it. Scene editing, that's between and within scenes. Hollywood uses what they call invisible editing, which means we're not really supposed to see it. This is the scene that starts with a master shot, then it goes into medium shots, and then it goes to close-ups. Within the close-ups, we have medium close shots, we have over-the-shoulder shots, we have this kind of stuff, back and forth, back and forth. Scene organization, whether it's linear, circular, it's the flashback. Cross-cutting is important because it is, in the beginning, you wouldn't understand what it would mean, but today we see it all the time. Cross-cutting is simultaneous action within the same time. That is, the basic idea is the woman that in an old silent movie that's tied to the railroad tracks, the train's coming down the railroad, the hero's on the horse galloping there to rescue her. Those are three disparate elements that we see on the screen, and yet if we cut those all together, we know they're all happening within the same time frame. Okay, point of view editing, that is, a subjective idea. From whose point of view are we seeing things? The 180-degree rule, that's for filmmaking people, again, where you have that invisible line, you just don't cross the line. That maintains continuity. Okay, moving on. Egads, I've really talked a lot. The studio system. Okay, the Motion Picture Patents Company, they owned it. The key players in the creation of the early studio system, like William Fox, Carl Laemmle, we know those guys are important because what they did was they violated the Motion Picture Patents Company. They got away with it. Louis B. Mayer and so forth. Strategies of control, the oligopoly, that's that vertical integration we had at the very beginning. Production, distribution, exhibition. Understand those other things that are associated with how they marketed films. And the Sherman antitrust ruling, which ruled against the MPCC, so anybody could make movies. The major studios, Paramount, MGM, Fox, so forth, and the minors, Universal, Columbia, United Artists. The low budget, Poverty Row, all of those names of those, they'll be identified there in your study guide. In 1948, they had to get rid of that vertical control. And what did they get rid of? They got rid of their movie theaters. They still controlled production and the distribution. The important thing there is that the rise of film artisans and independent film producers occurred after that, so that studios are primarily financiers and distributors of independently made films. The star, the important thing to know there is that stars have masks or personas that were created by film studios in the very beginning, and now the star, more or less, controls the studio. Okay, genre, that's the important thing there. They stabilize an otherwise unstable movie industry. We already mentioned that. Each new film banks on a number of familiar elements, motifs, and themes, but in a new way. It's just, we made one Western, these are the elements that we have, but we do something different with them in another film. And that leads us to the Western, distinctly American, based on dime novels. I got to rush through all of this, but you'll find it on your study guide. The three ingredients. Landscape is very important in Westerns, and the symbolism there, and its culture conflicts primarily. And space films, that's the final frontier. And comedy, we've already kind of going on today. We talked a little bit about that. And if you're confused and bewildered and all that, just stop by during office hours or send me an email. And remember, the study guide is available. It's on Moodle, no makeup exams, and you're responsible. And it's the end, and I got through it, and we did it. Thank you. Bye. Now, because we're off the air.